රට සතුට ගෙන එන ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජනපෞර
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
Hello, very good evening and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. Our theme this evening, the citizen's role for economic recovery. And who better than to have on the program than Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, who of course is a former, happily retired, Assistant Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Very good evening to you, Dr. Anila, and welcome to Newsline.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program.
It's entirely a pleasure, I think it's ours, but we're very grateful that you come here. The citizen's role in the recovery of the economy, I suppose. But more importantly, really, or as important, is how on earth did Sri Lanka get into a situation where we've had quite literally empty coffers, no dollars. We were only able to print rupees. How did we get there?
I think it's been coming for a long time. And the last government, I think, brought what was already a deteriorating situation to a right royal crash through very foolish policies. But I like to put it in one sentence, and I think I'm quoting from my own article I wrote to the papers. It's a question of unsustainable policies, from unrealistic expectations, of a citizenry that has become very entitled. And by that I mean, first of all, I must say that I think certain basic services like education, health, food security, personal security are rights of citizens of any country. But I think because of this handouts being given in various forms, people began to think that that was, part of the whole exercise, and have got used to not recognizing that governments don't have money of their own, that all these services could be provided to them without thinking about where the funds were coming from.
So when you say entitled, does that mean that people got used to having this subsidized almost everything? Subsidized fuel, subsidized gas, subsidized transport, everything was subsidized.
Exactly. And not only and again, we have to always protect the poor in our country, the really destitute.
Yeah.
But above that, the middle class, the wealthy, you look at business. Why would one want to give subsidized fertilizer to large corporates? Why would one want to subsidize the transplanting and the replanting on the plantations? Now, all those were subsidized. Why would one want to give low-interest loans when things are bad? I'm not a business person, and I'm laughed at by my business colleagues, my friends who are business people. For me, a business is about risk versus return. So sometimes the risk is taken and the return doesn't come, and then you accommodate that somehow. But in Sri Lanka, the habit is for companies, the businesses, to go to the government with a begging bowl, asking for low interest loans or interest-free loans or something like that. So that's what I mean by entitled. Government must serve all.
Isn't it also true, Dr. Anila, that...
Just call me Anila, please.
Thank you, Anila. Isn't it true that it is that special breed of people in our country, or sometimes known as politicians, that it is they who have made our country, or most of the people in Sri Lanka, to be categorized as that entitled feeling, because they set the prices. We didn't say sell us. We didn't. For most people, probably didn't know how much the real cost of a litre of petrol was, but they did, and it was all at the end of the day for their political well-being.
It's a two-way street because we put them in power. Why do we elect people who don't have good records, who don't have good reputations? Because the votes are given by the entitled citizen to somebody who will give their child a school, give their wife a transfer, give their husband a job. So it's not about what you know, it's about who you know in this country. Give, a contract. So it's two ways. The politicians accommodate that to get the votes, and then they are beholden to the whoever helped them to get in, and then they owe favors, and the people expect it. I mean, I used to put all the blame on politicians, but I think it's a two-way street.
But now the real crisis point came when we found that we really had no dollars.
No dollars and no rupees either. We were just printing.
Print, yes.
Yeah.
Luckily, they must have had enough. They must have had enough of stocks of ink. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to print it because they didn't have enough money to bring. Anyway, so I want to ask you. It is a dollar crisis, and. So Sri Lanka didn't have any dollars. From the 12th of April last year, we supposedly bankrupt. We didn't pay any of our international debt. We didn't service. We didn't do anything. So isn't it true to say, or am I being naive? But from that year, it's just over a year now.
Yeah.
Surely we must have got some of that money lying around at the central bank.
Well, it's like this. The reserves. Usually in a country, you probably call it safe if you have 3 to 4 months of import cover of reserves. We went down to zero.
Wow.
And we went down to zero very foolishly. We should have gone in for debt restructuring much earlier because we couldn't afford to pay.
How much earlier?
It's been
pre-COVID?
Good economists have been talking about debt restructuring. No, post-COVID. Good economists have been talking about debt restructuring, and I'm not an economist by training, for at least 2 years. And if you look at countries that did go in for debt restructuring, they did it much earlier because then the pain is much less.
Right.
And in fact, I got involved with a group of people who were trying to, they spoke to all the political parties as early as January of 2022, some of the smaller political parties, to tell the government, look, you need to do this. You cannot go on paying. We're going to have nothing left. But of course, it was left far too late. If you look at the newspaper articles from about at least 2 years ago, this issue has been coming up. But also, we had a dollar crisis, but we also had a rupee crisis in that. In the 2020 budget, the government it was the most asinine thing they could have done. They removed all these key taxes. As it is, people pay very few people pay taxes, and at very low rates. Now they've gone in the other direction. But I think that's a good thing. You had a situation where the withholding tax was removed and the pay tax was removed. Now, when you remove two critical taxes like that, you mess up the cash flow of the treasury. Because withholding and pay are collected every month. So, the government has to pay for, all the services they provide to the people, etc. And these taxes that come in regularly give you the cash flow. So, when you stop that, a lot of people who the withholding tax is removed at the what's the word?
At the point.
Yes. So they are not bothering to do tax because they are already paying.
Yeah.
So when you remove withholding tax, a lot of those people, elderly people who don't even have a tax file, are not going to, retirees who live on finance.
They're not going to bother.
They're not going to bother. So you lose that. You lose the cash flow.
Is this
And we pay the same.
completely somebody somewhere being totally unaware of how these things are done?
Yes, sheer ignorance. You had a finance
But yet
minister, you had a governor, you had a secretary treasury.
the central bank, we have the treasury, full of the creme de la creme of our...
I'm not going to comment.
Right, okay. No, I know you can't sort of have a go at your...
There are excellent economists in the central bank, but sometimes maybe their advice is not listened to. And because people...
Well, okay, what about this then? In terms of dollars?
Yeah. Oh, so to answer your question that you asked me. Yeah, so we were in a situation where we had nothing. We had nothing. We could not, we all know there was no essential food, no medicines. Still, the hospitals didn't even have cotton wool, you know, as bad as that. And then, of course, no cooking gas, no fuel, and no electricity because no fuel. So in that situation, and then again, the 200 rupees to the dollar nonsense, you know, holding it fixed, all the migrant remittances came in through a Hawala system. They didn't go through the banking system. So you have a situation where the banks have no dollars to give you for anything. So now what has happened is little by little the situation has eased. And because we have been able to manage through, you know, that the quota system was a very good and everybody's reduced on their fuel, we are now able to manage with less foreign exchange for the economy to keep going. But in that process, we also have to now resurrect the livelihoods of the people because tourism was dead, etc. So now that is what is happening now. But we are not yet in a position to start paying our debts because we, for the first time in the history of Sri Lanka, we went in for a debt moratorium and we are now going through a whole debt restructuring process. In that process, you have to get all the creditors to agree. You can't treat one creditor different from the other. So in that is a long process. So until that is decided upon and who's what is the haircut, how is it going to be, you know, there are so many issues now. Is the return on the investment going to be less? Is what is the new repayment period? All those have to be decided and decided equivalently. All have to agree. The bilaterals, the not the multilaterals, they get away scot-free. I think they also should be in this. That's my opinion. And the capital markets. So till that is decided, you can't start paying A, B, or C because nothing is decided. What's the new
but my point is that in
so
between,
the money can collect till then.
Is the money being collected now?
Well, if you look at
if
you look at the reserves, every month the data come out, and the reserves have gone up to from nothing. I think it's gone up to about 1 or 2 billion, if I'm not mistaken. The central bank annual report at the end of December figures. So they are slowly building up. But you know, we are not in a stable position yet. On the surface, yes, we have the fuel, we have the gas. For
but we need about 6 billion a year.
We will need. We were using. Who told me it was
500 million a month.
The fuel alone was $600 million US a month, and then with the quotas and all, it went down to 300 million. But the revenue they were getting at that stage some months ago was like 150. I said, how do you manage? I spoke to somebody, they looked at me with their eyes open. So you know you have to, and now the remittances are coming back through the banking system. Because exports are slowly picking up because the exchange rate, it overshot. So we are getting there, but too soon yet till the debt restructuring is finalized to start the repayments.
What about this business of looking after the most vulnerable?
Yes.
And there's a suggestion that they can have bank accounts and the money can go straight into the bank. And I suppose what is not being said is that by doing this, you're hopefully depoliticizing that part of it.
We hope so. I was involved in, my goodness, 2002, 2004 in a similar exercise where there was a selection process. I'm a statistician where we use the data, and in every Anila division you'd select according to a model, and then you did a pre-testing period where people in the village would say, yes, this person deserves, is not in the system, that person does not. It was piloted in Jaffna where there had been no Samadhi. It worked very well. And then the decision was at that time, we were involved in the technical side to pilot it in the south. And it was piloted, I remember at that time, exactly I think what they're trying to do now, similar, but now of course more sophisticated techniques will use 20 years later. And it was piloted in the south, and it was found that many less people would be getting the what was it called then, Samuddi or Janasavi or whatever.
Yeah.
And immediately the equivalent of the Samuddi workers went on strike. Because they knew their jobs were at stake, and those were very, political jobs. And that was the end of that. I won't tell you which president was there at that time.
No.
So that was the end of that. So then it was shelved. The Welfare Benefits Board became ineffective, and then it became a whole, as you say, a very politicized thing. Now I think that they've done another new model, and they're trying to do it on a proper basis. I don't know that much about it because I'm out of it, but hopefully it will be depoliticized.
All right. I think it's now time to go for a break. So we're in conversation with Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, retired happily, Assistant Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. We'll take a peek at this evening's headlines and then come right back to Dr. Anila. See you on the other side.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
Supreme Mahanaik of Sri Lanka Amarapura Mahanikaya, the most venerable Dodampahala Chandrasiri Mahanaika Thera, passes away. Dengue cases could spike during monsoon season. Over 400 dengue cases reported on Monday. Will Vadivel Suresh join the government? Catholic Church condemns statements by Jerome Fernando. Activists file complaint with CID.
මීළඟ රාජපක්ෂ වරයාව රාජපක්ෂ ගෝත්‍රිකයාව ජනාධිපති කරන්නද කියන බරපතල සැකය අපිට මතුවලා තියෙනවා.
Suspect remanded for links to the Gotabaya Rajapaksa assassination attempt in 2006, released after 15 years. SJB files legal action for compensation following Express Pearl disaster. Sri Lanka's Police Commission gets a new chairman.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, retired happily, former Assistant Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So, Anila, tell me, with all these sort of IMF thing agreed, negotiations hopefully going on now for debt restructuring and so on, does that mean that Sri Lanka can now break the proverbial bottle? And are we out of it now?
Out of the woods?
Yeah.
I don't. Temporarily, we're out of a very, very serious crisis.
Right.
And we are, I think, on the right path. I mean, the poor IMF has been made such a boogeyman. Either people love them or they hate them. I mean, the IMF is only a means of getting us a little credibility with in the international scene. So all that is going in the right direction. But see, the way I look at it, there are so many serious reforms in so many sectors that we need to take hard decisions. And unless we do those now, when people have realized what a mess we got ourselves into, I don't think we will come completely out of the woods.
And this government, or any government of the day currently, what of these key economic indicators, which area should they be focusing on in terms of securing dollar revenue?
Definitely you have to raise your export revenue, and when I say that, I don't just mean manufactured goods, I mean also services. So certainly we have to raise we have to go in for much higher value addition in tourism and in the manufacturing sector. And to do that, I don't think the government at any time should be focusing on specific sectors. It is not the government's job to micromanage people's economic decisions. In my view, it is the government's job to establish a stable situation and to improve the human and the physical infrastructure to create an enabling environment for exports to grow, whether it is tourism, whether it is factory industry. So when I say human infrastructure, I mean, the whole approval system in this country,
Yeah.
the transportation system, the communication system, those have to be at a very high level. This giving tax holidays and low interest loans and all will only bring in short-term investors. You have to create a very stable environment, and I believe the government has to focus on that, and then let people take the decisions.
We've seen a sort of return to some form of stability, and people are pointing to the management of like the fuel and so on. But what of the dollar? The exchange rate in the last few days has been more in our favor and so on. But is that because the dollar has been losing ground all over the world? Or is it something that we are doing?
Well, it's a combination. It's something that I think initially when the 200 was let go, which was really the most idiotic decision to keep it at 200, it overshot. That happens. It overshot the mark. So
you
now
say it was idiotic because the bulk of the foreign remittances would have gone elsewhere?
It was because we had completely overvalued the rupee by keeping it at 200. It's a question of demand and supply. If you keep it at 200, then you're encouraging unnecessary imports because it's so cheap, and you're discouraging the export revenue to come in, like the remittances. So it's it's a demand and supply balancing act. So the exchange rate is just a price of. It's a price like anything else.
What do you think the dollar will end up at the end of the year?
I'm not a clairvoyant.
No, I was about to say that. But what do you think?
When they...
I can give you a clue, though. I spoke to some large exporters, and most of them said that we think internally our people are saying that it'll be upwards of 350. By the end of the year, but it's now...
They probably know more than I do. But I do remember a lot of people, when it was let go, people said it'll stabilize. At that time, it'll stabilize about 300, then it went to 380. Now it's coming down, it's about 320 now,
so
right?
About around 320.
Yeah, right. So it'll also depend on when we start our debt repayments. Once the debt restructuring is over and we have that burden coming back to us where we have to pay, then the demand for the dollars, you have to balance what the government needs to repay, etc., etc. So I think I honestly wouldn't have an answer to your question.
No.
The exporters may know best.
What should we do? Should we sort of do that? Keep our fingers crossed. Keep our fingers crossed. Keep it crossed. That's all. Thank you for your questions, by the way. 0772 300 305 card coming up on the screen if no extras around. Now then, what do you say to the farmers? They've taken a terrible hit. Then what do you say to the SMEs in the tourism sector? Bentota, Hikkadwa, Nigambo, they're all a fraction of what they were. Everyone's struggling. Yeah. And I'm told that because the moratorium's finished, the banks are now saying, cough up. From where? Okay. Cough up from where?
There's two aspects. One is not only the farmers, SME sector, etc. I think it's a little known fact that 70% of employment in this country is in the hands of what in Sri Lanka we call the informal sector. And when I say informal sector, it will be any organization that does not pay EPF or does not come under the labour laws. And that 70% contributes a large share of the economic output. So all those sectors have been affected. The fishermen because there was no fuel, tourism sector because there was no cooking gas and no electricity and no transport, farmers there was no fertilizer. So that is a serious problem. And one of the one of the issues we see in this country is that their voice is not heard enough in decision making. It is the large corporates that have the ear of the ministers and the bureaucrats, and the large corporates, I don't think they definitely contribute less than 50% of the economy. But it's their voice that's heard. So I think the one thing that needs to be done is recognition of how our economy is structured. And in that sense, the agricultural sector is actually it's one of the most inefficient. The labor productivity is much lower than in industry and services. And we have, I'll just give you some facts. It's the lowest labor productivity. It only contributes 8% to economic output and 14% of exports, 2022 data. I prepared a slide on this for some presentation I was doing. And 26% of employment, right? And I think there are much more efficient ways in which some of the farming can be done, right? I'm not an expert in this area, but we now have 60 to 70 institutions, government, state institutions supporting the agriculture sector. There are about 10 to 20,000 in the field supposedly helping every ground.
So this is one of the sectors that the government really needs to
reorganize, rationalize, and see where there's so much knowledge in the Department of Agriculture, all the researchers, but it never trickles down to the farmer. So the government has to rationalize the entire agriculture sector.
What do you have a comment on? Basically, without mentioning specific instances, but where state banks write off monies lent to known companies, known individuals, and so on. And yet, the common man, is sought after by the banks to pay their loans.
I must say I'm not aware of whose loans
No,
are
I'm not saying
off,
anything anyway, but I'm just telling you that happens.
But, that again is in times gone by, not recently.
Is this another entitlement?
In the sense that in times gone by, every farmer knew that if there was going to be an election and you voted, the government that said we are going to forgive your loans,
that's where the vote
yes,
would go.
so again, as another form of subsidy or entitlement. So farmers, they took an economic decision, they didn't pay back their loans because they knew as soon as the new government comes in, the loans will be forgiven. So this kind of irrational behavior. And the other thing I wanted to say was that in the case of this agriculture sector, you have to one day, there's so many ministries, right? The left ministry doesn't know what the right ministry hand is doing. So, one day the trade ministry will support the consumer. The next day the agriculture ministry is supporting the producer. So there are inconsistencies in the policy decisions taken. So as a result, you cannot grow an economy when there's policy inconsistency. This is one example. So in that kind of situation, and the way our politics works with all these coalitions, you have to keep these MPs happy. So you create ministries not because you need the ministry, but because you have to give somebody a favor or whatever you call it when you make them a minister. So you have all these ministers running around not knowing what they are doing, confusing each other, confusing the issues. How can you have a country moving when the policies are so inconsistent?
How do we... Okay, thank you. This is a good idea. As a citizen, Sri Lanka, forget your central banking background and all that.
That was a long time ago.
Yes, indeed. What would you like? Next week, the IMF chiefs of mission in Sri Lanka arriving on this program, and it's your chance to ask the questions. What would you want me to ask them?
I wouldn't want you to ask the IMF anything. Because IMF is there to help us. We must know what we want. Why should we go to the IMF to ask? You're asking about policies, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to ask the IMF to answer the question, what are you guys doing to help us, the people, in terms of the frittering away of our monies, corruption? Should they get involved in that? You got a few seconds.
Okay. I think we have to do it for ourselves. IMF is there to support us, but they can't be taking our decisions.
Right.
Corruption is one thing. The other thing is the labor market reforms, education reforms. All
Right.
those have to...
It's been marvellous, Dr. Anila Dias Bandaranaike, to have you on our programme. And that's the way it was. So it's now time for the Primetime News. Take care, have a great evening as much as you can, and God bless you all.
Thank you for having me.